With the suspension process by our league and our leaders in the W. This was not a thorough investigation, in my opinion.
The Indiana Fever just handed the league office the most embarrassing photograph in recent WNBA memory, and Stephanie White is standing in the middle of it, looking completely lost. Caitlin Clark showed up, the fans did not, and the people running this league need to sit with that sentence until it burns, because it is the most damning indictment of how this franchise has been managed that you will ever see captured in a single arena photograph. Welcome back, this is Rimrun, and today we are documenting the moment the Indiana Fever's front office finally reaped exactly what it sowed. An empty building, a furious fan base, and a Mercury general manager named Nate Tibbitz standing at a podium saying things so disconnected from reality that you genuinely have to hear them to believe they were spoken out loud.
Clean up our game, but I do think it's important not to rely on social media screenshots. This is a slippery slope.
Let me be entirely clear about what this video is and what it is not. This is not a video about the Indiana Fever beating the Los Angeles Sparks. That win means nothing. You are supposed to beat the Los Angeles Sparks. The Sparks are one of the most depleted rosters in the entire league right now. No Kelsey Plum, no Cameron Brink, a collection of players fighting for roster spots and practice reps. Beating that team is not an accomplishment. It is the floor. It is the absolute minimum expectation. The story is not the scoreboard. The story is what the building looked like when the game was being played. The story is what the fan base just communicated to the Indiana Fever, to Stephanie White, to the league office, and to every executive who has spent the last several months watching Caitlin Clark get physically targeted on the court, and responding with silence, with hedging, with bureaucratic non-answers. The fans watched all of that. They processed all of it. And then on game night, they made a decision. They stayed home. That is the story. That is the only story. And we are going to spend the next 16 minutes making sure you understand every single layer of what that decision means and why the people responsible for creating this crisis have no one to blame but themselves.
She's a competitor, she's a winner, and she's tough. The one thing she is not is cheap.
Let us start with the photographs, because the photographs are undeniable. 5 minutes before tip-off at Gainbridge Fieldhouse, the upper deck is completely empty. Not partially empty, not sparsely populated, completely empty. You can see full sections, entire blocks of seats, with not a single human being in them. The lower bowl has gaps that you could walk through without brushing a shoulder. Caitlin Clark herself is on the court signing autographs before the game, and if you look at the footage of her doing it, you can see the arena behind her. It is a ghost town. She is signing autographs in a building that looks like a Tuesday morning practice facility. That is the image. That is the reality. And the people who created this situation, the people who watch this fan base beg, plead, and publicly demand that the franchise protect its most important player, those people are now staring at those photographs and trying to figure out how to spin them. They cannot spin them. You cannot spin empty seats. Empty seats are the most honest statement a fan base can make. Empty seats do not lie. Empty seats do not exaggerate. Empty seats do not have an agenda. They simply reflect the decision that thousands of paying customers made when they weighed the product being offered against the price being asked, and concluded that the product was not worth it. And understand what makes this even more catastrophic for the Fever organization specifically. This is not a market that was indifferent to the Indiana Fever before Caitlin Clark arrived. This is a market that was electrified. This is a market that was selling out games, generating national television attention, driving merchandise revenue across the entire league. The Caitlin Clark effect was real. It was documented. It was measurable. And the franchise had one job. One singular, unavoidable, brutally simple job, which was to protect that golden goose, to make the fans feel like the organization had their back, to make Caitlin Clark feel like the franchise was fighting for her. They failed that job, completely. And the empty seats are the receipt. Now let us talk about what the fans were actually responding to, because this boycott did not materialize out of nowhere. Reporting circulating around this game made the fan frustration crystal clear. They are tired. They want the Indiana Fever to step up and protect Caitlin Clark. They want the organization to stop sending little hints and call out the commissioner directly. They want accountability, not diplomacy. They want the franchise to stand in front of a microphone and say, with force and without hedging, that what has been happening to their player is unacceptable and will not be tolerated. Instead, what they got was silence. What they got was giveaways, free tires, Bath & Body Works kits, promotional items designed to paper over empty seats with bodies that were bribed into the building. And on this particular night, even the bribes did not work. The people said no. They said no to the free stuff. They said no to the promotional offers. They said no to the entire proposition of showing up for an organization that has not shown up for the player they came to see. That is a level of fan frustration that goes beyond casual disappointment. That is organized, deliberate, collective action. And the Fever front office needs to understand that you do not recover from that kind of fan revolt by winning a game against the Los Angeles Sparks. Here is what makes this even more painful to watch. Caitlin Clark did not boycott. Caitlin Clark showed up. She was there. She was on the court. She was signing autographs, meeting fans, connecting with the people who did make the trip, and reuniting with Kate Martin, a moment that was genuinely warm and genuinely human and genuinely good to see. Clark is not the problem. Clark has never been the problem. Clark has been the one constant in this entire situation who has done everything right. She shows up, she competes, she connects with the fan base, she does not complain publicly, she does not demand trades, she does not make the organization look bad. She makes the organization look good every single time she walks into a building, which is exactly why the optics of her signing autographs in front of an empty arena are so absolutely devastating. Because the message those photographs send is unmistakable. The player is here. The franchise failed to give her fans a reason to be here with her. And the franchise had every tool available to fix this. Every tool. They had the most marketable player in the history of the WNBA. They had a fan base that was already activated and already passionate and already showing up in record numbers. All they had to do was protect her. All they had to do was stand behind her with the same energy that her fans were bringing to every single game. They did not do that. They watched Alyssa Thomas put her hands on Caitlin Clark's throat. They watched the league hand out a one-game suspension. And they said nothing that communicated real urgency, real anger, real commitment to their players' safety. The fans noticed. The fans always notice. And now the building is empty. Now here is where it gets even more infuriating. Because it is not just the Fever organization that failed in this moment. There is a second actor in this story who has decided that this is the right time to step in front of a microphone and say the most tone-deaf, disconnected, reality-denying things that have been said at a podium in recent WNBA memory. And his name is Nate Tibbitz. Tibbitz is the general manager of the Phoenix Mercury. And after Alyssa Thomas received her suspension for the flagrant foul on Caitlin Clark, Tibbitz decided to hold a press conference. He decided to speak, and what he said is something that every single person watching this video needs to hear directly from his own mouth, because reading a summary of it does not fully capture how completely divorced from observable reality his statement was. Don't take my word for it. Here is Nate Tibbitz, in his own words, describing the suspension process as he sees it.
With the suspension process by our league and our leaders in the W, this was not a thorough investigation in my opinion.
He said it. With cameras rolling and a microphone in his face, Nate Tibbitz stood at that podium and complained that the league did not call Alyssa Thomas or the Mercury organization before handing down the suspension. He called it a failure of protocol. He called it disappointing. He said the people involved were not questioned. Let me say that back to you so you do not miss it. The general manager of the Phoenix Mercury is arguing that before the WNBA suspended a player for a flagrant foul that was recorded on video from multiple camera angles and broadcast live to millions of people, the league should have picked up the phone and asked that player what she thought happened. That is the argument. That is the position Nate Tibbitz chose to take publicly. And I need you to sit with that for a second, because it is breathtaking in its audacity. The play is on video. It was watched live. Every person in that arena saw it. Every person at home saw it. The referees on the floor saw it and called it a flagrant foul in real time. What exactly was the phone call supposed to accomplish? What was Alyssa Thomas going to say that would have changed the outcome? What new information was going to emerge from a conversation with the Mercury organization that was not already visible on the tape? The answer is nothing. There is no new information, there is no missing context. There is a play on video and the play speaks for itself.
Clean up our game, but I do think it's important not to rely on social media screenshots. This is a slippery slope.
But Tibbitz was not done. Because after the protocol complaint, he pivoted. And the pivot is where things went from tone-deaf to genuinely offensive. Tibbitz stood at that podium and argued that the league should not rely on what he called social media screenshots when making disciplinary decisions. Social media screenshots, that is what he called the video evidence of a flagrant foul on Caitlin Clark. He framed it as a social media phenomenon. He framed the public outrage over the play as a product of online mob mentality rather than a rational response to a thing that everyone watched happen on a live broadcast. And then he went further. He argued that the league needs to apply consistency across all players regardless of, and I am going to quote this directly so there is no ambiguity, veteran or young players, or white players or black players. He said it. He brought race into it. After spending the first portion of his statement arguing that the suspension was unjust and that the process was flawed and that the league failed to follow proper protocol, Nate Tibbitz landed on race as his closing argument. When the factual case collapsed, when the video evidence made the protocol argument impossible to sustain, the final card he played was to suggest that Alyssa Thomas was suspended because of racial dynamics rather than because she committed a flagrant foul on camera. Let me be entirely clear about what that argument does and does not accomplish. What it does not accomplish is exonerating Alyssa Thomas. The tape is the tape. The foul is the foul. No framing, no recontextualization, no appeal to consistency or racial equity changes what is visible on that video. What the argument does accomplish is muddying the water. It shifts the conversation from the specific act that occurred on the court to a broader, more emotionally charged debate about race and fairness in the league. And that shift is not accidental. That shift is a deliberate rhetorical strategy deployed by someone who ran out of factual ground to stand on. When you have no argument left, you change the subject. And the subject Tibbitz chose to change to was race. That is a choice. That is a deliberate choice. And it is a choice that deserves to be called out directly and without apology. Now let us talk about Stephanie White, because Stephanie White is not an innocent bystander in this conversation. Stephanie White is the head coach of the Indiana Fever. She is the person who is supposed to be the loudest voice in the room when it comes to protecting Caitlin Clark. She is the person who is supposed to stand at the podium after a game and make it absolutely clear that her franchise and her coaching staff will not tolerate what has been happening to their player. And Tibbitz specifically addressed White in his statement. He said he respects her, he got to know her through USA Basketball, he understands her sticking up for her player. But then he said that White's claim that there were 2 cheap shots in the game was, in his words, ridiculous. He said it directly. He called the head coach of the Indiana Fever ridiculous for defending her own player. That is where we are. That is the level of disrespect that is being directed at the Fever organization from within the league itself. And the question you have to ask is, what has Stephanie White done to make that level of dismissal feel acceptable? What has the Indiana Fever done to establish such a forceful, unambiguous public position that someone like Nate Tibbitz would think twice before standing at a podium and calling their coach's assessment ridiculous? The answer, based on everything we have seen this season, is not enough. Not nearly enough. The Fever have been too quiet, too diplomatic, too willing to let the league handle things through its own process rather than applying public pressure that forces the league to move faster and more decisively. And the fans have noticed that too. The empty building is not just a message about Alyssa Thomas and the flagrant foul. The empty building is a message about the entire posture of the Indiana Fever organization toward the protection of their most important asset. The fans are saying, we need you to fight harder. We need you to be louder. We need you to make it uncomfortable for the people who are allowing this to continue. And until the organization does that, until Stephanie White or the front office or someone with authority in that building stands up and makes it genuinely, publicly uncomfortable for the people responsible for this pattern, the fans are going to keep making the same decision they made on this night. Here is what makes the Tibbitz press conference particularly revealing. And this is the part of the story that the establishment media is not spending enough time on. Tibbitz is not just a general manager defending his player. Tibbitz is also a member of the referee task force. He said it himself in the same statement. He is part of the referee task force, the same task force that includes Stephanie White, Cheryl Reeve, and Becky Hammon. The goal of that task force, according to Tibbitz, is to clean up the game. Those are his words, clean up the game. And yet here is this same person, standing at a podium, arguing that a suspension handed down for a flagrant foul captured on video was unjust because the league did not make a phone call first. Here is this same person, who is supposed to be part of the solution to the physical play problem in the WNBA, running interference for the player who committed the foul. Do you see the contradiction? Do you see how completely those two positions undermine each other? You cannot be on the task force to clean up the game and simultaneously argue that players who commit flagrant fouls on camera should receive more procedural protections before being held accountable. Those two positions are mutually exclusive, and Tibbitz held both of them in the same press conference without apparently noticing the contradiction. And here is the second receipt. Here is the moment in Tibbitz' statement that tells you everything you need to know about the actual argument he was making and why it falls apart the moment you examine it. Don't take my word for it. Listen to what he said about the evidence itself.
The competitor, she's a winner and she's tough. The one thing she is not is cheap.
He said it, cameras rolling. Nate Tibbitz, general manager of the Phoenix Mercury, member of the WNBA referee task force, stood at a podium and argued that the league should not rely on social media screenshots. That is the phrase he used, social media screenshots, for a play that was broadcast on live television, for a play that was called a flagrant foul by the referees who were standing on the court when it happened, for a play that has been watched by millions of people who all saw the same thing. He called that evidence social media screenshots. And that framing is not a mistake. That framing is a strategy. By calling the video evidence social media screenshots, Tibbitz is attempting to delegitimize the public reaction to the play. He is trying to reframe justified outrage as online hysteria. He is trying to make it seem like the people who are angry about what happened to Caitlin Clark are just Twitter mobs reacting to clips taken out of context, rather than fans who watched a live game and saw something that was wrong. That is a deliberate, calculated attempt to gaslight an entire fan base, and the fan base is not having it. The empty building is proof that the fan base is not having it. Let us now stake some predictions, because this situation is not static, it is moving, and the trajectory it is on leads somewhere specific. First prediction: the Indiana Fever's attendance problem does not resolve itself through wins alone. Wins against depleted rosters like the Los Angeles Sparks do not move the needle on fan trust. What moves the needle on fan trust is the organization taking a visible, public, forceful stand on behalf of Caitlin Clark. Not a statement released through a PR department, not a carefully worded comment in a post-game press conference. A real, unambiguous public declaration that the Indiana Fever will not tolerate the physical targeting of their player and will use every available avenue, public pressure, commissioner calls, media engagement to make that position clear. Until that happens, the fan base's calculus does not change, the seats stay empty, the giveaways stop working, and the organization continues to hemorrhage the goodwill that Caitlin Clark spent an entire rookie season building. Second prediction: Nate Tibbitz' press conference becomes a liability for the Phoenix Mercury. The race argument, specifically, is going to follow the Mercury organization. It is going to be referenced every time there is a disciplinary situation involving a Mercury player. It is going to be the thing that reporters ask about in future press conferences. Tibbitz opened a door with that statement that he is going to have a very difficult time closing, because once you introduce race as an explanatory variable for a suspension that was handed down based on video evidence, you have made a claim that requires either consistent application or public retraction, and the Mercury organization is not going to retract it. So it will sit there, on the record, available for reference every single time a Mercury player does something that requires league discipline. Third prediction: Alyssa Thomas's reputation in this league is now permanently altered by the accumulation of incidents. The choke slam on Angel Reese, the flagrant foul on Caitlin Clark, the Isabel Jacobu situation that reporting suggests is still affecting that player's availability. That is a pattern. That is not a collection of isolated incidents. That is a documented pattern of physical play that goes beyond competitive toughness and into something that the league's own referee task force, the task force that Nate Tibbitz himself sits on, is supposed to be addressing. The fact that the general manager of the team employing the player with this documented pattern is the same person arguing that the league's disciplinary process is flawed is not ironic. It is exactly the problem. It is exactly the conflict of interest that makes the task force's work impossible to take seriously. Fourth prediction: Stephanie White's seat gets warmer if the attendance numbers do not improve. Not because she is a bad coach, not because the team is not winning games, but because the narrative around the Indiana Fever right now is not about wins and losses. It is about the relationship between the franchise and its fan base. It is about whether the organization has the courage to fight publicly for its most important player. And Stephanie White, as the most visible face of the franchise on a day-to-day basis, is the person who will absorb the most scrutiny if that relationship continues to deteriorate. She needs to be louder, she needs to be more forceful, she needs to make it impossible for someone like Nate Tibbitz to stand at a podium and call her assessment ridiculous without facing immediate, sustained, and very public pushback from the Indiana Fever organization. Now here is the clip that recontextualizes everything. Because in the middle of all of Tibbet's complaints about protocol and process and social media screenshots and racial consistency, he said one sentence that accidentally told you exactly what his real motivation was. He said it while trying to explain why the Mercury organization deserved to be consulted before the suspension was handed down. And when you hear it, you understand that the entire press conference was not about justice or fairness or process. It was about protecting a player who the organization knows has a problem. Listen to what he said about Alyssa Thomas's character. She is a competitor. She is a winner. She is tough. The one thing she is not is cheap. That is what Nate Tibbitz said, with cameras rolling. After everything that has been documented about Alyssa Thomas's physical play in this league, after the chokeslam on Angel Reese, after the flagrant foul on Caitlin Clark, after the situation involving Isabel Yakubu that reporting suggests is still keeping that player out of the game right now. After all of that, the general manager of the Phoenix Mercury stood at a podium and said the one thing she is not is cheap. There is no spin to put on that. That is not a defense of a player who made a mistake. That is a general manager refusing to acknowledge a documented pattern because acknowledging it would require accountability. And accountability is the one thing the people in power in this league have consistently, deliberately, and catastrophically refused to deliver. And that is the real story, not the empty seats, though the empty seats are the most visible symptom. Not the Tibbitz press conference, though the press conference is the most audacious example of institutional deflection you will find in recent memory. The real story is that the people who are supposed to be the adults in the room, the general managers, the league officials, the task force members, the coaches, have created a culture where a player can commit a documented flagrant foul on the most marketable athlete in the sport's history, and the response from the perpetrator's organization is a press conference complaining about the phone call that did not happen. That is the culture, that is the environment, and Caitlin Clark is operating inside of it every single night, showing up, competing, connecting with fans, doing everything right, while the institutions around her fail her in ways that are now so visible that the fans are voting with their feet. Caitlin Clark showed up to that game. She signed autographs, she reunited with Kate Martin, she played, she competed. She did not quit, did not sulk, did not make it about herself. She is doing exactly what you would want your franchise player to do in a difficult situation. She is being the professional that the organization around her has failed to be. And the fans who stayed home on this night did not stay home because of Caitlin Clark. They stayed home because of everyone else. They stayed home because of the front office that has not been loud enough. Because of the league that handed down a one-game suspension and called it accountability. Because of the general managers who stand at podiums and call video evidence social media screenshots. Because of the task force members who sit on committees to clean up the game while simultaneously running interference for the players creating the problem. Caitlin Clark is not the reason that building was empty. Caitlin Clark is the reason it was ever full. Here is the forced choice I am leaving you with today, and I want you to answer it in the comments right now. Do you believe the Indiana Fever's attendance crisis gets fixed this season, or has the damage already been done and the fan base does not come back until the organization makes a visible, public, unambiguous stand for Caitlin Clark? Not a win against a depleted roster, not a giveaway night, a real, documented public commitment. That is the question. Answer it below. If this video gave you something to think about, hit that like button right now. It takes 2 seconds and it tells the algorithm that this conversation matters. Subscribe to Rimrun if you are not already here, and hit that bell notification so you do not miss the next video, because this story is not over. Not by a long shot. We will be back.